Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into an ancient dialogue that is, honestly, shockingly relevant to our modern lives. We're looking at a fascinating excerpt from the Mahabharata, specifically section 215. Now, on the surface, this sounds like pure mythology, right? Curses, sages, rebirth. But just beneath that surface, it is an absolute masterclass in human psychology, mental resilience, and social equality. So grab your focus, because we are going to unpack some incredibly powerful ancient lessons on character and contentment.
Think about this. How does a cursed, low-class hunter teach a high-class priest the meaning of life? It's a completely bizarre, almost backwards premise for the era it was written in. But the authors of this ancient text use this narrative as a kind of Trojan horse. They set up this super rigid societal expectation, only to just completely flip it on its head. And they do it to deliver a timeless message about who we are and how we handle our own minds. This hunter, known as a fowler, basically becomes the ultimate professor of life to a guy who, by birth, was supposed to already know it all.
Section 1. A Curse from the Past. To really grasp the weight of this hunter's wisdom, we first have to look at the theological and mythological backstory that put him in this position in the first place.
So to simplify a very dense mythological history, the fowler explains to the priest that in a past life he made a terrible mistake. He unwittingly shot an arrow into a powerful rishi, a sage. Now, even though it was a total accident, actions have consequences, right? So the rishi cursed him. But the fowler immediately did what literally any of us would do. He pleaded for mercy. He explained it was an honest mistake, and he successfully extracted the arrow, saving the rishi's life. Because of that sincere plea and his quick corrective action, his destiny took a very specific turn. He was reborn as a Sudra, a member of the lowest social class, making his living as a hunter.
What's really fascinating here is how the text frames the rishi's mercy. See, the curse couldn't be entirely erased. That's a staple of this ancient theology. The word of a sage just cannot be falsified. But it was softened. The rishi did him a massive favor. Even though he was born into a lower class, the fowler was allowed to remain a pious man. He retained the memory of his past life, which, by the way, is a huge theological advantage, and he was given a crystal-clear path to spiritual perfection, honoring his parents. Through filial piety, he was promised he'd eventually go to heaven and return to his former high status as a Brahmana. So, he knows exactly why he is where he is, and he's fully accepted his path. Section 2. Character over social class. Now the story dramatically shifts from that mythological backstory to a radical challenge of the rigid social assumptions of its era.
Before we look at the societal clash, we need to talk about karma. When the text talks about karma, the footnotes actually point out that it's highly difficult to translate perfectly into English. Why? Because in the ancient Hindu mind, religion and morals were invariably associated with each other. They weren't separate categories at all. Your actions, your morality, and your spiritual standing were all completely tangled into one single concept. So when the priest evaluates the hunter, he is looking through this exact lens of moral and religious action.
And this brilliantly illustrates the turning point of the text. The Brahmana, listening to the fowler's incredible wisdom and self-awareness, comes to a shocking realization. He points out that a high-class priest, a Brahmana, who is vain, haughty, addicted to vices, and wedded to evil practices, is, in spiritual reality, no better than the lowest class. He is like a Sudra. Inversely, a Sudra who is adorned with righteousness, self-restraint, and truthfulness, like our fowler, is, in the priest's own words, considered to be a Brahmana. The priest literally outright tells the fowler, "Even now I consider thee to be a Brahmana, there is no doubt about this."
The whole crucial point is summarized perfectly in this profound quote from the text. A man becomes a Brahmana by his character. By his own evil karma, a man attains a terrible doom, but through virtue, he elevates himself. Guys, this is a revolutionary idea for the time. The text is explicitly stating that personal virtue, self-restraint, and truthfulness completely outweigh your birthright or social label. Section 3. Curing the mind's afflictions. Having shattered the illusions of social class, the dialogue now shifts focus to the individual's inner world, offering a remarkably modern take on mental well-being.
The fowler states the bodily afflictions should be cured with medicines and the mental ones with spiritual wisdom. Just notice how cleanly he separates physical health from mental health here. It is such an incredibly clear, practical view. If your body is sick, you don't just meditate, you take medicine. But if your mind is afflicted, while medicine isn't going to fix the root cause, for the mind, you need what he calls spiritual wisdom or the power of knowledge.
So what does this spiritual wisdom actually look like in practice? Well, it looks like an absolute refusal to engage in the futility of grief. The text argues that men of low intelligence, acting as it says, like boys, are overpowered by grief when something disagreeable happens or when they just don't get something they really want. The fowler points out that every creature is subject to happiness and misery. It's a universal law. Therefore, grieving over the uncontrollable is just a lack of intelligence. The wise recognize this trap early on, and they quickly mend their ways before grief can take root, knowing that whoever grieves for it only makes himself uneasy.
Section 4. The poison of discontent. If grief is a sign of low intelligence, well, there's another mental state that the fowler warns is outright lethal. The original text uses a very specific word here, vishada. And the footnote translation of this term is super important. It's not just feeling a bit unhappy or having a bad day. No, the text explains that vishada is a complex mixture of discontent, perplexity, and confusion. Think of it as a heavy, paralyzing mental fog where you're completely dissatisfied with your life, deeply confused about your purpose, and entirely lacking in direction.
The fowler cleanly contrasts those who master their minds against those who fall to this vishada. The traits of the wise include being completely indifferent to the extreme swings of happiness and misery. Because of their knowledge, they're always contented, and they stay conscious of the final destiny of all creatures, keeping that big, cosmic perspective. The foolish, on the other hand, are the exact opposite. They're always discontented, like there is no end to their discontentment. They become overpowered with perplexity, and, as the text specifically notes, they lose their vigor, lacking the manliness and energy to act when action is actually required.
Just listen to this terrifying and brilliant imagery. One must not give way to discontent, for it is like a virulent poison. The fowler goes on to say that discontent kills a person of undeveloped intelligence just as a child is killed by an enraged snake. I mean, wow. Discontent isn't just a bad mood. The text is treating it as an active, aggressive venom that will completely destroy your potential and your life if you let it bite you.
But hold on, we have to be careful here. When the fowler talks about being indifferent to happiness and misery, he is absolutely not advocating for laziness or passive resignation. Passive indifference accomplishes no good. Our actions are surely followed by their consequences. So instead of just sitting around murmuring and complaining about the world, the text demands active salvation. You have to actively try to find the way to secure exemption from spiritual misery. And once you find that means of salvation, you've got to do the hard work to free yourself from sensuality and worldly attachments. It requires immense, highly focused effort.
Section 5. Returning to duty. So, after all that, how does our high-class priest receive this intense, mind-bending philosophical lecture from a hunter? Let's check out the resolution.
The Brahmana doesn't even try to argue. He is completely humbled. He acknowledges the fowler's vast intelligence and basically says, "I have no cause to find fault with thee." Then, we see these three really fascinating steps of departure. First, the Brahmana walks around the fowler. As the footnote explains, this was a traditional form of Hindu etiquette at parting, a sign of deep respect shown to a master. Second, he bids him adieu and departs for home. And third, and I'd argue most importantly, he immediately applies the lesson. He doesn't go off to a cave to become a hermit. He returns home and becomes duly assiduous in his attention to his old parents, dedicating himself to his worldly duty of filial piety, exactly like the fowler was doing.
Before we finish up, let's briefly zoom out to the overarching narrative frame here. The text we just explored is actually a story being told by a sage named Markandeya to a king named Yudhishthira. After concluding this history full of moral instruction, Yudhishthira replies that he is absolutely amazed. He says that while listening to this wonderful moral story, his time has glided away like a moment, and he's not even satiated yet. He wants to hear more. The story was so deeply engaging and true that time simply vanished for the listener. Which, honestly, is exactly what we hope to achieve by unpacking it for you today.
So we're going to leave you with this final thought, drawn straight from the core of the fowler's wisdom. Take a second to really reflect on your own mindset right now. Are you curing your mental afflictions with spiritual wisdom and perspective? Or are you acting like the foolish, letting the virulent poison of discontent, that enraged snake of confusion and perplexity, just take over your life? Character is defined by our choices, not our circumstances. Choose wisdom. Thanks so much for joining us on this explainer, and we'll catch you next time as we uncover more incredible insights.